In Chapter 6 of Food Over Medicine, what did you mean by managing your doctor?
Well, the way you manage your doctor is the way that you manage buying everything else, okay? I teach by analogy. So I have been in the building I'm in for, I don't know, 15, 16 years now. And I have a great landlord. Not many people say that about their landlord. I like my landlord. He takes very good care of this property, and every time we renew the lease, he does new things inside my space and all that. But when it was time for lease renewal, I took it home and read it, the lease. Okay. Now, I like bread, but I signed my name to $1 million. So I'm going to read that lease before I put my name on it, just to make sure there isn't something in there that's like, whoa, right? And there wasn't, but you still read it, right? When you buy a blender, people get online, they look at consumer reports, right? Financial advisors, you check them out and you look into a mutual fund on your own. I mean, it's your money, right? So we have very good strategies for checking out other things that we do. When I bought my house, I looked at comps on the street. I don't want to overpay for the house. You never want to be the most expensive house on the street, right? So looked into that. Okay, so then people walk into a doctor's office, it's like they go brain dead. All the good buying habits they have for everything else they've ever done in their life, which actually turned out pretty good most of the time. I mean, we can all look back and say, well, I shouldn't have done that. But for the most part, most people who think and look into stuff end up pretty well. You go to a doctor's office, and he says you need an $80,000 surgery. I've scheduled it for next Thursday, and we go, okay, right? And that's really bad. So again, if it's not an emergency, one of the questions we teach our members to ask, say to the doctor, you want me to do this? I'm going to take that under advisement. Please give me the research studies showing that this is a good idea for people like me. I'll read them. I'll do some research on my own. I'll get back to you and let you know what I'm going to do. And a doctor that gets upset about that, you need to get rid of him or her anyway, because you cannot have a relationship with somebody who says, do what I say, or we can't do this anymore.
Is chicken a better choice for our health than beef? And how about fish?
Chicken and fish are not better than beef and pork. The key, if you're going to continue to eat animal foods, we don't really have any evidence showing that that in itself is a dangerous practice, but it's dose dependent. If you take a look at all the healthy populations around the world, the blue zones, there aren't any of them that are indigenously vegan, right? But what they have in common is their consumption of animal food is a tiny, tiny percentage of their calories. They're eating mostly plant foods. So if we were in Ethiopia right now, we'd be having a little bit of goat meat, but it would be served in a dish that has lots of tubers and vegetables and rice and that sort of thing. If we were eating in rural China, we might have some egg in the soup, but it's mostly, plant food. But it really doesn't matter what type. What matters is how much of it you're consuming. So one's not better than the other. It's the dose that counts.
Do you recommend men get a PSA test? And what is a PSA test?
Prostate-specific antigen is advertised as a marker for prostate cancer, but it's not. An interesting side story, Dr. Richard Ablin is the person who discovered PSA. He's the researcher who discovered it. It's a good friend of mine. And he wrote a great book called The Great Prostate Hoax. I recommend all men read it. He's been a presenter at our conferences before. And he's been trying to tell people for many, many years, decades, that it's not a marker for cancer. A lot of things can affect your PSA level. Riding a bike the day before, sexual activity the day before. Diet affects PSA quite a bit. But the error rate, or the false positive rate for a PSA test, is about 78%. And then it gets worse from there. So it's not a marker for cancer, so we should stop doing this. But what it leads to is biopsy. And the problem with the biopsies is that men tend to develop prostate cancer as they age. Like in Japanese autopsy studies have shown that almost all men in Japan die with prostate cancer, not of it, okay? So here's what I'm getting at. If you do a PSA test that's elevated for any variety of reasons on a 75-year-old man, and you do a biopsy, we already know he's got prostate cancer. The question is the prostate cancer going to kill him, or is he going to die of something else with the prostate cancer? So when you start talking about prostatectomy, which is often what's recommended in some of the treatments that render men impotent and incontinent, it's gross overtreatment. In fact, According to Dr. Ablin, 1 million men in the United States have had a prostatectomy that was not warranted. Okay, so bad test, not an accurate marker, was never designed. What it is good for is monitoring patients who have been diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer that really is cancer. And there are some good reasons to monitor PSA tests then, but as a screening tool, it's absolutely useless.
What impact does eating eggs have on cholesterol levels and our health?
Eating eggs has a direct impact on cholesterol levels. The addition of even one large egg a day, just one, can be noticed in cholesterol tests within just a matter of a few weeks. Okay, so people will say, but there are studies that show the opposite. And let me tell you what happened there. You know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, the government made a decision to stop doing testing for cholesterol, food and cholesterol. And they did the same thing with smoking, not because they think that cholesterol and smoking aren't important, but the government doesn't have unlimited resources for research. And they legitimately said, look, we have a pretty big body of evidence showing that diet affects cholesterol. High cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. And I don't think anybody's going to make an argument that smoking is really good for you. We're not going to make any interesting discoveries there, so we're going to stop funding those kinds of studies. Well, the Egg Board, which is pretty aggressive about promoting eggs, and that's their job, that's what they do. But they seized this opportunity and they started conducting studies of their own. And one of the things that you have to be very careful of is study design. Because in some of these studies, what they did is they got people who were already eating a diet really high in cholesterol. And there's something called a cholesterol saturation point, where you're eating so much cholesterol, and your cholesterol may be high, but the thing is, adding a little bit more cholesterol isn't going to make it higher. So you can claim, well, we gave these people, an extra 7 eggs a week. Their cholesterol didn't go up. Woohoo, right? Well, then you can do another kind of nefarious thing, which is you say, we're going to do a meta-analysis on these studies on eggs and cholesterol. And the time period for the meta-analysis is going to be 1992 forward. Well, now what you do is you lop off all that negative information about eggs and diet and cholesterol that happened before by making your inclusion criteria, the studies that came after the Egg Board got involved. And that's what they did, and they were able to make a pretty good case based on false premise that it really wasn't harmful to eat eggs.